Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
That clip that you saw is the origin of the metaphor, the red pill. Now, this metaphor, I think, is one of the most influential in quite some time because it is so accurate. The question is, what does it mean to be red-pilled in today's society? Well, quite simply, it means that you no longer believe the mainstream narrative insofar as events are concerned, and instead look for yourself for an actual explanation as to what's going on. This seems odd, because shouldn't the mainstream narrative be accurate? Well, the fact of the matter is, historically, the mainstream narrative has been accurate. The mainstream narrative is, of course, what the elites, the cultural and socioeconomic elites, say is going on in the society. They say and report and describe a certain reality, and that reality tends to conform to what is actually going on. You can think of it like a clock face. Now, right now, the clock is roughly what? Around like midday, 12 o'clock, right? I look out the window and the sun is, well, behind the clouds here in London. It's up there high in the sky. But suppose, for instance, that I look at the clock face and the clock face tells me 12. And I look out the window and it's barely dawn. It can't be 12. It can't be 12 noon. It can't be 12 midnight because it's barely dawn. Barely dawn is roughly what? 5:30, 6:30, 7 in the morning. Not 12. See, that's what's going on with the mainstream narrative. The mainstream narrative is telling us one thing, that reality is this. But the reality on the ground, the reality that the majority of the population are perceiving, is vastly different. For example, to take a very simple example, the issue of mass migration into the countries of Western Europe. Now, the mainstream narrative, what the cultural elites are saying, what the socio-economic and political elites are saying, they're saying that mass immigration is a wonderful thing for Europe. And yet the people on the ground in Europe, the people who live with these mass migrants, they are seeing something vastly different. They are seeing an incredible spike in crime rates. They are seeing a lack of assimilation by these new immigrants. They are seeing that this group of mass immigrants cost an enormous amount of money. They are seeing a very, very different reality than what the mainstream is saying. It is this gap that has been widening over the last 10, 15 years, especially, as a matter of fact, over the last 5 years or so. What the mainstream is saying and what is actually going on has grown apart so radically that we have created this term, the red pill. In point of fact, this very channel is called Coach Red Pill. Why do you think it is? It's because I am telling you things that I know that are radically different from what the mainstream is saying. And I'm telling you this, by the way, just so that, not because I'm wiser, but just because I'm older and I've been around longer, and so I know things and I have certain points of view. But these are points of view that are true and real and accurate about the reality around us that the mainstream is not reporting. This gap is the problem. It's why we have the concept of the red pill. Now, how did this gap originate? And this is an important question, and you should have it in the forefront of your mind. There are two reasons why this gap has originated and has grown. The first reason is economic. Because you see, what has happened over the last 30 years or so, ever since 1990 and the advent of NAFTA, is that the Western democracies outsourced their manufacturing base. All of the factories in the Western democracies that required unskilled labor, guys with just a high school diploma, well, all of those factories were shipped overseas to China, to Vietnam, to Mexico, and what have you, countries that have very low labor costs. Now, this happened because the economy was deregulated during the 80s, and this allowed the free flow of capital and the deregulation of the labor markets. And so companies would close up their factories in the Western democracies, say in the United States or in Great Britain. They would close up the factory, send the factory to China, and send the capital to build the factory to China, build that factory in China, hire very cheap Chinese labor, build the same products, and ship them back to the Western democracies. Now, what happened was that everybody got very cheap consumer goods, but what happened, of course, was that a lot of people were left unemployed. And a lot of people foolishly said, oh, well, the market, the magic of the market, and the market will fix it. But that's, of course, didn't happen. And now you have huge swaths of the population that are unemployed and will never be gainfully employed. These people, these not very educated people with barely high school diplomas, if that, who used to have a good factory job, and with that good factory job, they were able to provide for their family, own their own home, their own car, and live a fairly decent life. Well, now those people have nothing. They have no opportunities. And that group of people comprises something like 60, 70, 80% of the population, because the only people who benefited from globalization are the top 20%, especially the top 1%. The top 1% and their service class, the lawyers, the accountants, the doctors, the interior decorators, the marketing executives, all those people in the top 20%, they benefited. They benefited from globalization. The rest of the population, the 80% of the population, they did not. See, that was the outcome of globalization. And that dichotomy between the 20% and the 80%, you see it in every chart, in every graph of information, that the wealth and income of the 80% has remained static or has decreased, whereas that of the 20% has increased exponentially. That divide is why those people in the 20%, the elites, who create a lot of the narrative that all of the society shares, well, they are saying one thing, whereas that 80% is perceiving something completely different. That 80% includes the people who voted for Donald Trump, includes the people who voted for Brexit. You see? Because of this economic marginalization, this economic alienation, an economic marginalization and alienation that has become a social marginalization, a social alienation. Because what the mainstream is saying and what the reality they perceive is so far apart that they have instinctively and automatically taken the red pill, on the one hand. Now, that's one cause of the red pill, of that gap between the mainstream narrative and reality. The other reason is something even more pernicious. It is the cultural Marxism that has permeated higher education. Because from higher education, this cultural Marxism, the social justice warrior bullshit, the whole notion of social justice, the whole notion that the Western democracies are inherently evil, well, that very, very pernicious, that very evil ideology, because it is an ideology, that has permeated not just universities, but the students, and those students have gone on to the corporations. And now it has permeated the private sector, especially in the upper echelons of the private sector, in the C-suite. You know, the corporate executives, the CEOs, they believe this bullshit. They believe this ideology. And this ideology has nothing to do with reality, like all ideologies. See? So, these SJWs who inhabit the C-suite, these SJWs who are controlling the narrative in the media companies, well, they're all of one line. They are progressives, quote unquote. Now, notice that in all media companies, in every medium, be it painting, be it literature, be it television, be it film, everybody believes the same politics. You have an outlier here or there, one random person who thinks a little bit different, but for the most part, everybody's a good progressive, or at least that's what they say. They have to, because they recognize that today, in today's media environment, it is so intolerant. The people who have power are so intolerant, just unwilling to entertain any kind of divergent view, that anybody who does have a divergent view has to keep their mouth shut. So what has happened is that this cultural elite, they all think and say the same thing. There is no viewpoint diversity. This cultural elite, this top 20% of the cultural elite, the ones who decide which books get published, the people who decide which video on YouTube to put into limited state and which to ban outright, this cultural elite, because of their ideology, they believe in a narrative that has nothing to do with reality. They are in their own little bubble. And through their power, the power that they have by way of control of the media, they are pushing a narrative, pushing a reality that the Western democracies are evil, that the Western democracies are inherently racist, sexist, what have you. They are pushing degeneracies and decadences like transsexuality, pedophilia, and all the rest of it. They are pushing this, and the rest of the population, the 80%, recognizes that this is not true. They realize that this is wrong. And so you have the narrative of the elites separating from reality, the reality on the ground. Now, what happens, of course, is that there are people who are temperamentally, educationally, intellectually capable of being part of that elite, part of that top 20%. I consider myself one such person. But we are completely alienated from that cultural elite, the establishment cultural elite, because we recognize that the narrative that they are selling is simply not true. A lot of my fellow content creators on YouTube, they have the capability, the talent, the drive, the energy to be a part of that cultural elite. They have the ability to be a part of it. But because of their views, they will never be allowed to join. And so as an outlet for their creativity, as an outlet for their energy, as an outlet for their point of view, which tends to be a lot more accurate about reality than the nonsense, the narrative that the top 20% is selling. Well, these people are doing YouTube videos. I'm talking about people like Black Pigeon Speaks, Mr. Medicare, Styx Hexenhammer. All of these people are doing content in other circumstances, in other times. These people would be welcomed into the cultural elite. But today they are not, because they have the wrong point of view. You see? So that's what's going on. The elites have become warped. They are living in a bubble, in a, on the one hand, economic bubble, divorced from the problems affecting the 80%, and on the other hand, a cultural ideological bubble, unwilling to look at other opinions, other ideas. And in point of fact, insofar as the cultural front is concerned, we are already seeing how the elites are not trying to simply dismiss divergent ideas. They are now trying to actively repress them. In Germany, for example, you have people who have channels on YouTube. They are no longer able to be seen in Germany because the German government considers them to be wrongthink. On YouTube, you have videos that contain no nudity, no violence, no foul language, and yet they are put into limited state. Why? Because of the ideas, because they are afraid of the ideas that the people who are not part of this cultural elite are saying, because these ideas are true. See, remember, nobody ever got upset by a lie, by something that is obviously not true. Everybody gets upset when people say the truth. And the elites are furious with independent content creators such as myself, such as the people I mentioned, because we are telling the truth. If we were telling lies or nonsense or bullshit, they wouldn't care. They wouldn't pay attention. That's why that recent Right-Wing Watch article that tried to smear everybody as alt-right, Nazi, white supremacist fascists. Why do you think that hit piece came out? It's because these people are telling the truth. It's because these people, their viewpoints, their point of view, their ideas, they're accurate. They are accurate representations of reality, whereas the cultural elites are not representing reality anymore. They are talking nonsense. Hence the red pill. Hence the idea of the red pill. That's what it means to be red-pilled. It means that you are no longer buying the mainstream narrative. And this is, of course, the problem with the creation of this gap between the mainstream narrative and reality. As this gap widens, as people become, the majority of people become more and more alienated from what the elites are saying, this is a recipe for revolution. That is where we are going. We are headed towards a revolution where the elites will be overthrown because the gap between the narrative and what is actually going on is becoming so wide that it is inevitable. This is what happened before the French Revolution. This is what happened before the Russian Revolution. That gap is the source of revolution. Because what is happening is that it is taking a smaller and smaller red pill for people to wake up and realize that this narrative is bullshit. When it comes to a point where the vast majority of the people believe that the elites are just selling bullshit, that will be a very, very bad day.